like, subscribe, and share. So, James, tell me a little bit about yourself, man. I know you're a Civil War reenactor. Was you in the Army? Or,
No, but no, I have never, by the way, been a Civil War reenactor.
Oh, okay. Somehow I thought she was, and because you and Michael were still so close, I thought you was a reenactor, but
Nope, never have been. Uh, Running around in a wool uniform in 90-degree weather just never got on the list of things that were fun to do as far as I was concerned. But I've collected and shot Civil War muskets for many years. You know, well over 50, I would say.
50 different types.
No, 50 years.
Oh, 50 years. Okay.
Numerous different types, though, and other small arms right up through World War II and later.
Well, tell me, because from when I was in the Army and what our NCOs told us that, the rifles from the World War II, really aren't much different as far as accuracy and stuff than the ones we use today. Tell us about like a musket, and you can start even back from Napoleon before they was rifled. How accurate was these things? From what distance? Was the kill zone?
Well, going back to Napoleonic times, your muskets back then were almost a whole different class of weapon, and you're really not speaking in terms of individual accuracy. This was all massed fire.
Instead of aim shot, instead of the Army motto, one shot, one kill, and taking an aim shot.
Firing was done by, and this goes through to the Civil War as well.
Right.
Men literally elbow to elbow. In fact, there was an expression, keeping the touch of elbows. During the Civil War, typically two ranks. So, and each man would be allotted about 2 feet of front.
Well, I was fixing to say, and I guess this still goes back from those days, is when we were marching, and they would count in cadence, dress it right, cover down 40 inches all around, and
things were a little tighter back during back in the 19th century. You were again literally on the march. Things would spread out a bit, but in line of battle, the men would be literally elbow to elbow, about 24 inches from front to back. So the whole idea was the only way to generate firepower was to mass the muskets, and the only way to mass the muskets was to mass the troops. With a smooth bore, it wasn't a case of individual accuracy. It was, if you would point and shoot, and if you hit the guy 3 places to the right of the one you were pointing at, you had no complaints. really wasn't much different in the Civil War when rifle muskets came in. It was still, individual accuracy was not a driving factor. Men generally received very little marksmanship training. Most of the training they got with their muskets was on how to load them.
Well, that's what I thought, because I think about when I went through basic training and, just the stuff that we had to learn, squad automatic weapon, firing a grenade launcher and stuff like that. And it seems like, and we had our drill and stuff like that. But it seems like in the Civil War, the thing was you drill and learn how to shoot a weapon, and that was pretty much it.
Yeah, I mean, Civil War, the tactical manuals were mainly drill manuals on how to march. There wasn't, weapons training was your main job. The main job of an infantryman was to carry the musket, shoot it when he was told to shoot it. You can really it wasn't like World War II or modern warfare, where if you grew up watching World War II movies or combat or or Platoon, whatever other anything more modern than that, it's all everybody's firing on their own accord. It wasn't that way during the Civil War. You were just there largely to carry the musket. The musket was really, in a very real sense, the officer's weapon. You were just there to carry it. He told you when to shoot, what to shoot at, and when to stop shooting. And there was very little individual initiative. But if you were out on the skirmish line, that was different. You had a little more leeway. But if you were in a line of battle,
How
you
important,
you just weren't firing unless you were told to.
how important was, and I'll go down through them because we get commander. How important was your senior NCOs in the Civil War as opposed to today's Army? Today's Army, they're referred to as the backbone of the Army. Officers give them the orders; they make sure they get handled out. I just wondered if it was the same back then with your sergeant.
It was probably pretty much the same. Officers would have been more remote from the enlisted men. The sergeant had a great deal of authority and responsibility.
Because and I often wonder now, I don't know when they finally gave the title. I think it was after Civil War, Command Sergeant Major, but like they in the Army, the most untouchable person is the Command Sergeant Major. Like nobody, no generals don't even say anything to a Command Sergeant Major. I mean, they're the highest rank enlisted person, and these guys are just untouchable. I mean, they're if they're a post command sergeant major, they are the general's right hand man, and
I don't think there were quite that many shades of distinction in the enlisted ranks at the time.
I don't think so either, because you think they just basically threw these guys together who were just farmers and they weren't professional soldiers. From the time they came out. I'm sorry, there were some things you was wanting to talk about. I didn't mean to get off track there while we was talking.
No, I'm quite capable of digressing myself, so it's not a problem. What I was thinking of, talking about, what I was going to be driven largely by your questions anyway. It was just that when it comes to Civil War infantry weapons, and the title I suggested for this talk is that they aren't what you might think. It's in many ways. It was not, well, as I was mentioning before, it wasn't like what you see in the World War II movies, and on TV where the infantryman has a lot of individual initiative. It was very much a case of do what you were told. And by the way, this lasted well into World War I and beyond.
Oh yeah.
The 1903 Springfield that was used in World War I, literally still had a magazine cut off. The soldier could load his magazine, and the idea was that from then on, he would be loading one round at a time and firing, on an officer's direction.
I mean, we're often taught in warfare that you fight the next war, the way you fought the last one. And I can't see how that when we got into World War One, that it took the Germans until 1917 to realize, hey, we can't take these machine gun nests by these men's chest. I mean, you're getting 60,000 people killed in a day, like the Somme and places like that. And I couldn't figure out. I mean, because even by the end of the Civil War, I mean, Lee, I'll give him credit for that, began to see that, hey, this isn't working. And, the trenches started going around Petersburg. We can't stand out in the open and trade shots with these people.
Yeah, it took a good couple of years for people to start learning that. Gettysburg, 2 years into the war, at Culp's Hill, Union General Greene, ordered his brigade to entrench, and that was quite controversial at the time.
Really?
There was a widespread belief among a lot of officers that entrenchments would spoil good troops. They get used to fighting behind cover and wouldn't want to come out.
I guess I can go back to even back. I guess the mentality back before the revolution or whatever. I mean, when a musket was good from 50 yards and artillery was good from 200 yards, or maybe a little further than that. But I mean, you could march right up on them before you were even in the kill zone. And I thought about this too, because Michael brought this up a couple times, and I want to say it's because the weapons were so much, had greater firepower, but he was talking about how
I think the firepower, was probably about equal. They were muzzle loaders. It was only fast that you could load and shoot them.
I guess what I mean is their range, because
rifling did increase the range, although
because I'm looking at the Battle of Borodino, you had 70,000 casualties. You had in some of the Napoleonic Wars, you'd have 150,000 casualties out there in some of these battles. And I was just wondering, why was they having 150,000 casualties, and in the Civil War battle, maybe it was the size of the armies, because sometimes you'd have 300,000 troops out there fighting an army of 200,000. I thought maybe that might have something to do with it.
It's hard for me to comment on that. I'm not really any kind of expert on Napoleonic warfare.
I'm a big fan of
or the size of the armies involved, or the casualties. Yeah. The Civil War, which is what I tend concentrating on.
But you know what Phillips always said, don't you? To understand the war, you have to understand Napoleon.
Well, to understand the war, to understand how the battles went, you have to understand how the weapons worked. In the case of the Civil War, what complicates that is that, especially for the first couple of years, it can be hard to know what kind of weapons a specific regiment even had. Did they have smooth bores? Did they have rifles? They might have had both kinds in the same regiment.
I had a great interview with, and I started breaking them down, and I'll break this one down. I'll put the whole unedited version up, but I'll break down the good parts. But Dan Korn, I don't know if you've heard any of his, but he's phenomenal. He's just great. He was a history professor, and he was talking about the Civil War, and he said, "Think about this." He said this was the last war where men went and were fighting on horseback with pikes, and by the end of the war, they were fighting with automatic weapons and grenades.
I don't know that I'd go so far as to say automatic weapons and grenades, but yeah, there was a lot.
What he was talking about with the, of course, you had the Gatling gun, but he was talking about with the, what was the weapon that, that was the 7-shot. The Yankees started.
Spencer.
Yeah, the Spencer.
Yeah, it stretches things to call that an automatic weapon. It was basically a lever action.
Well, I'll say for the time, I'll call it.
You can get hung up on terminology.
Oh yeah, easily. People get hung up on terminology. I see it all the time in here. You know, when you get stuff, people are going um, war between the states, war of northern aggression, civil war, and I'm like, just does it really matter? What it gets called. Uh, um, so anyway, you just want to tell us about. Tell me some more about the weapons. Uh,
Well, you've got two basic types. You've got the smooth bores and the rifle muskets.
mhm.
And as I said, for the first couple of years of the war, when you're reading about a specific battle, sometimes you don't know what kind of muskets they were using. People will criticize the generals, for using old-fashioned smoothbore tactics. But then if you look closer and you find out, well, that's exactly what his troops had. So, what kind of tactics are you going to use? If your men have smoothbores, that's the way you have to fight.
And I mean, how much did your tactics really change? It was either head on,
Not a
uh,
great deal, and
and
that's is that
envelope movement or double envelope movement. That's why I got you to explain in an echelon attack the other day. If you don't mind explaining it again, because some of the people might not have heard it.
oh, and an echelon attack is just a fancy French way of saying an attack that where the units attack in sequence from one flank working up along the line.
So basically, one flank attack, and the other
It's
flank.
acquired a lot of mystique over the years, uh, as being some kind of irresistible, attack. But it could also end up being a mess, and it just depends on how it goes.
It could end up being a mess for both sides, or for.
No, it can instead of being a carefully orchestrated sequential attack,
Uh,
it can easily end up being piecemeal and uncoordinated.
yeah, the way it was explained to me, and you can tell me, you know, if they was wrong, and but when the war class, the way it was explained to me is the premise behind it is you demonstrate against one flank where they think the attack's coming. The enemy starts to shift troops, and as they're shifting troops, then you launch the main attack from the other flank, and you try to catch them while they're moving, and basically roll up the flanks in the middle. If I described that right, I probably didn't. But that's how.
That sounds more like an envelopment. Or double envelopment.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's all kinds of different ways, but going back to the weapons, which is what I think we're focusing on here is as I said before, you almost have to visualize the troops in the Civil War as being essentially glorified spear carriers, and the weapons are really the officers' weapons. Uh,
That's an
and
interesting
as
way
far
to
as
put
the
it.
range at which the weapons were used, there was a lot of I don't know what word I would use, almost almost cultural influences on that. Here you had the troops with rifle muskets that could be effective at say 500 yards, maybe more, depending on their sights.
That it could
But the
be
officers
yeah,
didn't
500
want
yards.
their men opening fire at that kind of distance. And that's largely because there was a prejudice that if the troops opened fire too fast, they were unsteady and rattled, and no officer wanted people to think that his troops weren't steady. So they would have their troops hold their fire until a couple of hundred yards, despite having weapons that could shoot further.
Huh. I was not aware of that.
Oh yeah, it was the same. Also, uh, if troops were firing too fast, that officers in other units listening to the fight they'd be thinking, boy, those troops are really unsteady. They're wasting all kinds of ammo. So the officers, you know, there was a lot of cultural biases in how the officers managed their regiments. Uh, Also, there seems to have been, just my impression, that to the officers, a musket
Uh-huh.
was a musket. It didn't matter if it was rifled or smoothbore. You had a musket, you had a musket. You know,
Didn't matter. Okay, didn't matter how far it was from or good. So the we talked about the muskets. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that. Tell me about the cannons.
well, I don't pretend to be an artillery specialist. In what anything specific about them? I mean, they
Well,
clearly have a lot more range and power.
but didn't they? Wasn't they good for say 250, 300 yards
Oh,
before?
Civil War artillery,
And then
much
and
farther
then
than.
if they got rifled, they were good from up to a mile away.
No, even smoothbore artillery was good. Was effective could be at 1,000 yards. Uh,
Really?
Canister, yeah, then you're talking maybe 300 yards because it's like a big, shotgun round essentially. But
Yeah.
no,
Phil
even
Davis.
smoothbore artillery was effective.
He said it was just like a shotgun blast.
Excuse me again.
Coming at you. I mean, and he showed me those pebbles. I mean, they were just huge, and I could just imagine. I mean, they just shred somebody getting hit by one of those things.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, I wonder why cavalry. I know that their tactics have changed, but you never had too many battles where you used cavalry to break through or to follow through on a breakthrough.
Break through what? An enemy line?
Hmm.
Cavalry.
Like during
Cavalry
the
just
Napoleonic Wars when
cavalry
they
just
break through a line.
normally did not fight enemy infantry. It just didn't have the power. The the horses were too vulnerable. Uh, you know, the cavalry carbines didn't have the range of infantry muskets. Pretty much, once the battle was joined and the infantry was on the field and engaged with each other, the cavalry would withdraw. They'd operate on the flanks
But I
as
read during
they
the
they did they didn't belong on an infantry battlefield.
but I read during World War One, and maybe that's just the Europeans were still doing it. The Europeans they were still waiting for a breakthrough to send in the cavalry as the shock
Oh yeah,
troop to exploit.
absolutely.
Um,
It's a little bit of a different situation in World War One. The cavalry in World War One had basically the same rifles as the infantry,
okay.
and they could be used as breakthrough forces. But even there, it was and actually towards the end of World War One, they when the Germans were finally retreating and near surrendering, they did do a lot of you know follow up attacks and exploitation. But that was when the German army was pretty well shot. Earlier in the war, yeah, the British General Haig especially was always waiting for the breakthrough where he could put his cavalry through and you know wreak havoc in the enemy rear. But it never really happened.
So I did a thing on um one of our what if stuff on Tactical Tuesday, and my plan was on the third day at Gettysburg, instead of having the 2.5 hour bombardment, immediately start your bombardment keeping the Union soldiers' heads down, and then start your charge. And then as soon as they got to the line, then send your cavalry in at a full gallop. And as soon as they break the line, then you've got your cavalry coming through to break through. And somebody said, that's not a bad idea.
Yeah, except the cavalry wasn't there. The cavalry was operating off the flanks.
Right.
Providing security.
That was just, just an idea I threw out. I love playing the what ifs, and
yeah. Also, as a practical matter, artillery generally didn't fire over their own troops. It was too dangerous.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, because there's,
That's why Pickett's charge, the Confederate infantry, didn't even begin to advance until the artillery stopped.
And that just seems so. I mean, I guess looking back 200 years, idiotic to me. You start marching after they stopped firing, and then now they're getting up firing back at you, and it's like, you just.
Except, you got to keep in mind the fuses of the day were kind of crude. You'd have your troops marching, with early, shells bursting, their own shells bursting right in the middle of them.
Somebody asked me about that. When you see it going through the air, and I said that was the shells that were bursting. The fuses were going off too quick.
Yeah, it was, that's why on a Civil War battlefield, infantry was never posted in front of its own artillery.
Right.
They leave gaps for the artillery because it was just too dangerous.
I mean, I would like to see what I think I read. I think Michael told me that 9 out of 10 infantry charges failed in the Civil War. Yeah, I never researched it.
It's something I couldn't confirm or deny that one way or the other. I don't know what the statistics.
I love Michael to death. The first time we ever talked, we got into it. We didn't get into it bad, but he wasn't a moderator or anything yet, and it was his first night there. And he was talking about something about happened at Gettysburg, and it was something that I never heard of before. And I said, "Well, I've never heard that." I said, so I'm going to fact check that." And he goes, "You don't have to fact check it. I told you." And I laughed, and I said, "Well, with all due respect," I said, "I'm still going to fact check what you told me anyway."
Good idea.
Oh yeah, I learned a long time ago when somebody tells me something not to go out there and run my mouth and say it, to go back and find out,
there's a lot of misconceptions and just plain, a lot of myths floating around. It's and you can't fight them all. They're just part of the territory. And the Civil War.
Michael taught me so much about Gettysburg that because I guess you've heard of the book Killer Angels.
Who hasn't?
That's I love that book. It's my favorite one. Well, Michael was the one that taught me that it was probably as close to a historical fiction book that it could be, but it was so many stuff that just did not happen. Ewell was not the whipping boy that they made him out to be. Stuart followed Lee's orders to a T. Longstreet was not this tragic hero that people made him out to be.
It was a novel, and people, by the way, I forget who did it. Someone actually wrote a book debunking all the errors in the Killer Angels. But hey, it's a novel.
You can actually see that on YouTube.
I'm sure you can. Yeah, it's
and it was pretty good. And I mean, there was so much that was debunked. I mean, on there because and I'll tell people, and every year when we have our annual debate on the Killer Angels, and I'll usually start and say, I can settle everything for you right now. Ewell could not have taken that hill. He was staring down 30,000 or 17,000 troops and 17,000 troops and 30 cannon. Okay, and he had 10,000 men. There was no way he could have taken that hill, and neither could have Jackson. Stewart did not.
Ewell did a good job on July 1st.
Ewell, and people make him out to be windmill. Ewell performed better than is any general probably during that battle.
Well, the truth of the matter is, once the Confederate Army had driven the Union Army back through the town, that was it for the day. To do anything more, they would have had to generate a whole new offensive attack, and it just wasn't going to happen.
Well, Michael was right. He said, well, first of all, Michael made a good point, and I forgot what the fourth one was. But from where Lee was looking, from a distance, and he said, take that hill if practical. Michael said, which hill? Culp's Hill, Cemetery Ridge, and there was some other hill he called there. He said, there's 4 hills there, and there was troops on all of them. So which one was he talking about?
I think he was talking about Cemetery Hill, but
and I think he was talking about. And I go back and forth on that, though. I go back and forth on Cemetery and Culp's. I can't make my mind up. But Ewell was there on the ground, and could rise a situation. Johnson didn't arrive until after dark. Ewell could not have taken that hill. It would have been a slaughter.
No, and Civil War armies didn't fight after dark. So,
and another thing too that I love, and I'll bust people's chops on this right here, because I love when people say, "Oh, if Lee would have just listened to Longstreet," I said, and I'll go, "Listen to him what? Move around to the right." I said, "So you're going to do an about face, do a 25-mile road march in the middle of the night in unscouted enemy territory, hoping to find a road to get in between Meade and Washington. And the whole time, Meade is not going to do anything. And while this is going on, your columns are spread out for miles, and you're about to run into 4 Union Corps."
Yeah, people don't think it through. It would have been a fiasco in the making.
Oh, it would have been. They would have destroyed the Army peaceful. I found this, and I'll post it when it's the end. There was a professor who taught about it, and he showed where all the forces was at. And between all of them, it would have been a 25-mile road march in the dead of night in unscouted territory. I mean, and you're hoping Meade's just going to let you do it, and you're about to run into 4 corps with your columns spread out for 30 miles. That would have destroyed them in piecemeal. I mean,
anyone they sent around the right, they would have had the Union 6th Corps coming up behind them. And and by the way, people forget, they talk about infantry corps. You had the whole Union Artillery Reserve would have been right in front of them, which was a lot of combat power.
And the other one that gets me to is when Lee's orders, and I go by this and I split the difference with people. Some people say Lee didn't give his orders to Longstreet till 11, and then others say 9. Personally, I don't think Lee waited until 11 o'clock that afternoon to give orders. I don't believe in the sunrise order, that they said, but I can't see him waiting until 11 o'clock. So I usually split the difference with him. And, and then Longstreet has to make a counter march that costs them two more hours. They don't go into the fight until 5 o'clock. Michael told me that if he would have carried out the attack when Lee first ordered him, then they were numerically even. He said by that afternoon, they were outnumbered by 70,000 people. And I've also found something else out too when I was researching. Lee actually sent a courier over to Longstreet at noon, wanting to know why they had not went into the fight.
Yeah, it'll be debated forever. It's
And people,
My personal opinion, without getting into all the time frames of Lee's orders and things, is that Lee was a little too ready to just assume that the Union Army was going to sit there and await whatever was going to happen to it. It's
and he probably had good reason to think that when you look at Antietam. I mean, yeah, they did attack, but it was piecemeal, and then a second Manassas.
Yeah, but now we had a new general, and he supposedly said Meade would make no mistake in his front. He was you just can't assume, you can't assume that your enemy is going to just be cooperative enough to just await your pleasure. It's
and
you got to force the pace a little.
And I loved in this right here too is when people talk about, oh, Lee should have maneuvered, and I'll throw the map right up of Gettysburg, and I say, okay, Commander, which road you're taking? You got 4 roads right here, 2 on each side and 1 in the middle. Which way you going?
One very well-known. I'm sorry, I have to say, late lamented guide told me Lee had, and certainly by the second, had 2 choices: attack or leave.
I said the same thing. I said the way I put it was, I said when he went down Gettysburg, when he went down there, he had went down a dead end road, and it was either turn around or it was fight.
Yeah, exactly. If he didn't attack, he had to go back. He had there were no other choices.
And then,
by the way, he had what a lot of people overlook is you had all the Union militia that had gathered, up by Harrisburg.
Oh, they had called out 100,000 men.
Yeah, and the militia wouldn't have been worth much in a fight.
There's still 100,000 men.
But Joseph Stalin had a saying that quantity has a quality all its own. They may not have been good troops, but they would still have to have been dealt with.
And another thing too, because I was arguing with this guy and he didn't get it, and I said, look, they had burned the bridges at Wrightsville. He wasn't going to make it to Philadelphia.
Yeah.
I mean,
yep, exactly.
It was just, and at the end, when I'm always at the end of, and people ask me whose fault it was, and I start going down through it, and I said, well, Stewart was late, right? He didn't follow these orders, correct? And then I'll go, but wait, no, it's got to be Harry Heath. Harry Heath brought on the general engagement. And then I'll keep going, but no. It's got to be Longstreet. Longstreet was slow. And then I'll be like, no, but it's got to be Pickett then. Pickett carried out the attack. And then finally, it's about a 3-page thing I write. And finally, when I end, I said, there's only one person to blame. I said, and when they get the credit, they deserve it. And when they don't, it falls at their feet. There's only one person to blame for losing that battle, and that's General Lee. As much as I love him, he's the commanding general. And in the end of the final analysis, he's the commander in chief. And
I'm sure you were what, in the Army? I'm sure they taught you that the commanding officer is responsible for everything his unit does or fails to do.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly right. The commanding officer is, and I hate to do a sports analogy, but it's like Nick Saban in Alabama. He's the head coach. The buck stops with the head coach. That's where with anything, that's where it lies.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Lee knew that too.
Yeah, Lee knew that because it took it for. People don't really think about it, but for the humbleness that he showed and the I don't know what I'm looking for, manhood or owing up to his fault, that when Pickett's charge failed and he came back and he looked at his men and he said, "It's my fault." I mean, a
Well,
lot of people.
here's another thing that I point out to people sometimes is after the battle, Lee wrote a letter to Jefferson Davis, you know, offering to resign because of how he was starting to get old and his heart was starting to bother him and his vision was starting to fail. And people say, "See, he was sick." But what I point out to people there is, okay, there was probably some truth to that. He was, how old was he? Late 50s? I mean,
He
this
would
was
have been 50. Let's see.
56, whatever. But
Uh, Let me think. He would have he'd have been 56. He was
okay, so
born.
he had,
Yeah.
all right, he certainly had some medical issues.
Yeah.
And given the state of medicine in the 1860s, it was just natural. But I think he was actually dealing with his medical issues reasonably well. And what that letter was doing, that wasn't telling Jefferson Davis that I'm a sick man. That was Lee realizing that if Jefferson Davis did want to replace him, Davis was going to catch a lot of flack for it in the newspapers because Lee was very popular. And that letter was really to give Davis cover if he decided to fire Lee.
I don't think that ever crossed Davis's mind.
Well, whether it did or not, this was just
Right.
Lee realizing that if it did,
And I think, I mean, Michael disagrees with me. And I don't think it was major. Somebody said he had a major heart attack. He would have never been able to, go on that invasion if it was a major heart attack. But I do believe after Chancellorsville, he suffered a minor heart attack or had his first minor. From what I've read,
the problem figuring out what it was that the medical terminology of the day was so different that it's all right. He probably might have been. I've heard it might have been like pericarditis. I'm not a doctor.
Yeah, something like a swelling of the
Could have
heart.
been I don't think it was a serious heart attack. And what I also point out is that
I think it could have been a mild heart attack. I think he could have had his first.
Who knows?
I mean, like a very mild. People can have mild heart attacks and then not even realize.
Nowadays, they take him to the cath lab and put in a couple of stents. And he'd be fine. But now, if you want to, people talk about, oh, he was a sick man at Gettysburg. Well, if he was that sick, look at the retreat back to the river. That was, if anything, that was even more strenuous than the battle.
Yeah, I think he probably had some. I do believe he probably had some dysentery from eating the strawberries, but you got to think. Here's a man that's 60 years old, sitting in 100-degree heat, riding on horseback for 3 days. He wasn't. I mean, yeah, he was probably beginning to have some health problems, but he was not as sick as what they made him out to be.
Yeah, and he was a middle-aged man, in a time of questionable medicine. Of course,
think about something too. He was 56 at that time. The average lifespan was 60. That'd be like a 75, 76-year-old man today.
Yeah.
Commanding in the Army. And then, and then all of that, he stayed on, for 2 more years. And I read about that Lee's stamina was so, even when he was older, his stamina was something else that he would go to bed at 1 o'clock and would be up by 3:30 in the morning.
Well, he's a better man than I am then. So, listen, it's getting, I think you had said half an hour on the call initially, and it's about 7:45. If you don't mind, I think, I'd like to wrap this up.
Oh, not at all. We can, I get to talking and forget about it, and I'd love to have you on again and talk sometime.
Yeah, sure. I think why don't we call this this chapter done for the time being?
Sure.
We could always revisit it sometime in the future.
Sounds good, James. I enjoyed it.
Okay, I've enjoyed talking with you. It's nice to finally, not quite meet you face to face, but virtually face to face.
Yeah, yeah, this is good. We'll come up with some more chats and uh, something to talk about. But yeah, it was nice talking to you.
Yeah, and I realized that, thinking back over what we've been talking about, we really didn't speak about musket weaponry all that much. So
Well, sometimes I love my interviews where I'm interviewing people, but then sometimes I like just to sit down. I'm a big JFK buff, and there was a guy who I talked to the other night, and we just sat there and just had a friendly conversation and talked about the Kennedy
yeah,
assassination.
I've seen you make some comments about groups. I don't know what about the assassination and that sort of thing, but
Oh my God! If you think moderating a Civil War group is hard, come spend 5 minutes with me in a JFK assassination group.
that's why I'm not a member of any of them.
My God, I have it. I mean, it drives me insane. The
The only
stuff they.
comment I'll make there, and you can agree, disagree, whatever, is that I think the Warren Commission actually got it right, but they did a lousy job getting it right, and it just set the stage for decades of of groups
Uh,
like you're talking about.
I would not disagree with you one bit on that. What the Warren Commission, the problem
They,
they made was, and
and that and the fact that the autopsy was totally botched. So
um, the problem they had was, and FBI Director McCone admitted there was a benign cover up. Okay, people want to run with that and say, "Oh, there was a cover up. There was a conspiracy." The benign cover up is the FBI, Dallas Police, Secret Service. They dropped the ball on Oswald. They dropped the ball and allowed and I mean, not intentionally allowed it to happen, but they dropped the ball and got the president killed. So they covered that up, in my opinion, so they could get the heat off them. But in my opinion, Lee Harvey Oswald killed John F. Kennedy. Um, I've seen I've read the Warren Commission, countless things. In 60 something years, I've never seen a smoking gun, and I don't think you're going to find one in the next 2 or 3 years.
by the way, and I've also fired Carcanos, and the
Oh,
fact that
really?
I'm sorry.
Um, I have to. When we went to Dallas last year, I got one of my buddies from Canada. He brought a Carcano, and I found the weapon. The weapon was a little heavy and had a little bit of a kick. The only problem I found out of the weapon is it was prone to jam, but we had not even oiled it. And the first time I fired, it was from 50 meters, and I missed all 6 shots. Well, I figured out that it was firing high and to the right. So I put some old Kentucky windage on it, and then I had 6 kill shots. So it was a very accurate weapon to do what it was
It,
supposed to do.
Yeah, it was a relatively close shot, less than 100 yards, as I recall.
The headshot was 88 yards.
Yeah, and there was
The
no movement side to side, so
and another thing too, the car. People say the car was moving. Yes, the car was moving, but it was moving away, and so with it moving away, it was a stationary target.
it was essentially a stationary target. Yeah,
Right. And here's something else I point out to people when they talk about the grassy knoll shooter. The car was coming at you. You cannot track a moving vehicle coming at you. It's impossible.
also, quite frankly, what assassin in his right mind is going to shoot someone in a moving car with a pistol? It's
I mean, it's just
all right. Gavrilo Princip did it in the start of World War I with the Archduke, but that was not the
you,
same situation.
and I'll tell you one more story and I'll let you go. But they have gotten so much crazier now. They have now got this theory out that FBI agent Bookout, who had been one of the ones questioning Ruby, that Ruby had got down there, they took Ruby upstairs and had him locked up, and Bookout shot Oswald and pinned it on Ruby.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into all this. It's just like I say, I'm not an assassination student. So, but yeah, there were certain things, like I say, I think the commission got it right, but did a lousy job getting it right. And that's
I agree with that. I think I agree with most of the findings of the Warren Commission. There could have been a better investigation, and some other stones unturned. But I think for the most part
well,
they got it right.
also it was 63. And people these days, now people these days, I mean, they're used to having watched NCIS on TV for the last 15 years.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And now everyone just naturally expects that there'll be full forensics and what's his name? Who's the guy on NCIS? Ducky will be doing the autopsy, and I don't know if you watched NCIS or not. So, but
It's been a while since I've seen it.
it's that there really was no such expectation back then. It was a different world.
Yeah, I mean, because when they brought Oswald in there, they really violated his rights. They had him paraded around in cameras, and they should have never had that. Done that. I mean, I think he was guilty, but he still should have been awarded the same rights. They shouldn't have been parading him around like a
Different time.
Yeah, it was a different time.
Hey, listen, let me let you go. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
And I will talk soon, James.
Okay, you have a good evening.
You too, buddy.
Okay, take care.
All right.
How do I turn this off? Let's see.
Just hit the button.
The hang up the phone button?
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, take care.
All right.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Well, I'll get us off here. Let's see here. Oh, let me get off this.
He wants to let me do everything.